7 men, billions of fans worldwide, faces printed on billboards from Seoul to New York, and yet a Korean private detective with over 15 years of field experience claims some of them can vanish in a crowd like ghosts. We're not talking cute airport masks here. We're talking real evasion. Body language, walking patterns, psychological tricks that make trained eyes lose track. So, which member gets caught in seconds no matter what? Who could sit right next to you and you'd never know? And who made a veteran investigator say, "I'd lose him in a crowd of 20? 7 members, 7 ranks, 1 brutal verdict. Let's go. Number 7. J-Hope. Okay, let's be brutally honest right from the start. If you're a private detective and your assignment is to tail Jungkook through the streets of Seoul, congratulations, you just got the easiest paycheck of your entire career. Seriously, this man is, without exaggeration, the single most difficult BTS member to lose in a crowd, and not because he's trying to get noticed. Oh no, it's because every single fiber of his being radiates a frequency that the human eye is biologically incapable of ignoring. The Korean detective we're referencing in this list put it in the simplest, most devastating terms possible. J-Hope doesn't walk, he performs. Even when he thinks nobody's watching, his body is on stage. And honestly, if you've ever seen any behind-the-scenes footage, any fan cam, any airport arrival clip, you already know exactly what that means. Jungkook is a man whose own skeleton refuses to move in a straight line. His walk has rhythm, his gestures have choreography, his shoulders bounce, his chin tilts, his arms swing with a syncopation that looks like a warm-up routine before a concert. You could put him in the most generic black hoodie, the most oversized mask, the thickest pair of sunglasses on the market, and within 45 seconds, 45, someone in that crowd is going to turn their head and think, "Why is that guy moving like the music never stopped?" That's not a joke, that's his actual problem. The detective explained that in surveillance work, one of the very first things you're trained to identify is gait, the way a person walks. Every human being has a unique walking signature, almost like a fingerprint, and most people's gaits are forgettable. They blend, they're neutral. But J-Hope? His gait is a neon sign strapped to a fireworks display mounted on a parade float. There is absolutely nothing neutral about the way this man moves through physical space. He has spent so many years as a dancer, we're talking since he was a young teenager in Gwangju training in street dance, popping, locking, freestyle, winning local competitions before he even dreamed of becoming an idol, that his muscle memory has essentially overwritten his civilian programming. His body doesn't know how to just walk anymore. It grooves, it flows, it hits invisible beats that only he can hear. And that, from a detective standpoint, is an absolute disaster for anyone trying to stay anonymous. But wait, it gets worse. Let's talk about his energy signature. You know how some people just have a presence that fills a room the second they step inside? Jungkook doesn't just fill a room, he floods it, he overflows it. He drenches every corner with a vibration that makes people turn around even before they consciously register why they're turning around. Psychologists call this affective presence, the emotional atmosphere a person unconsciously projects onto their surroundings. Most people have a mild one. Some people have a strong one. Jungkook has one that could power a small city. When he's happy, which, let's be real, is approximately 97% of his waking hours, his face does this thing where every single muscle activates simultaneously. His eyes widen, his mouth stretches into that legendary sunshine smile, his eyebrows shoot up, and his entire head tilts back as he releases that laugh. Oh, that laugh. Let's talk about the laugh. The detective specifically mentioned this as what he called a critical vulnerability. Jungkook's laugh is not just loud, it's architecturally distinct. It has layers. It starts with a sharp inhale, escalates into a high-pitched staccato burst, and then cascades into this full-bodied, chest-shaking, shoulder-rocking eruption that echoes off walls and turns heads within a 30-meter radius. You cannot disguise that laugh. You cannot muffle it behind a mask. You cannot suppress it because Jungkook is fundamentally incapable of laughing quietly. It's not in his code. It's not in his DNA. The man was born in Gwangju on February 18, 1994, and I'm fairly certain the first sound the doctors heard wasn't a cry, it was that laugh. Now, let's layer on the fashion element because this is where it gets genuinely comical from an evasion standpoint. Jungkook is a known fashion enthusiast. We're talking about a man who has been spotted in public wearing custom Dior, limited edition sneakers that only 300 pairs of on the entire planet, and accessories that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Even when he tries to dress down, and to his credit, he does try sometimes, he does it with such an intentional, curated sense of style that the casual outfit ends up looking like a runway editorial for GQ Korea. The detective pointed out something fascinating here. Effective disguise isn't about wearing expensive clothes or cheap clothes. It's about wearing forgettable clothes. Number 6. BTS V. Kim Taehyung. The man whose face has been clinically, mathematically, and almost spiritually analyzed by plastic surgeons, beauty experts, fashion editors, and now, apparently, a Korean private detective who took one look at his bone structure and essentially said, yeah, this guy's never hiding from anyone. And you know what? He's absolutely right. Let's get something straight before we dive deep into this. V is not at number 6 because he's careless or because he doesn't try. He actually does try. There's footage of him pulling his mask up, tugging his hat down, hunching his shoulders, doing everything the textbook says you should do when you want to disappear in a public space. The problem, the fundamental, unsolvable, almost cosmically unfair problem, is that Kim Taehyung possesses a face that was engineered by whatever higher power you believe in to be looked at. Not glanced at, not briefly noticed. Looked at, stared at, studied, remembered. The detective broke this down in a way that was genuinely fascinating from a forensic standpoint. When you're trying to identify someone in a crowd, the first thing your brain processes isn't hair color, clothing, or accessories, it's facial geometry. The ratio between the eyes, the distance from the nose to the upper lip, the angle of the jawline, the depth of the brow ridge, these are the measurements that facial recognition software uses, and guess what? These are also the measurements that the human brain subconsciously calculates every single time it looks at another face. And Kim Taehyung's facial geometry is so far outside the statistical average, so extraordinarily proportioned that even when 80% of his face is covered by a mask, the remaining 20% is still enough to trigger recognition. His eyes alone are a forensic identifier. They have this very specific shape, large, deep set with a slight downward tilt at the outer corners that creates what Korean beauty standards call puppy eyes, but what the detective called, in much more clinical terms, a highly distinctive periorbital configuration that resists concealment. In other words, you can cover Taehyung's nose, mouth, chin, and forehead, and his eyes will still betray him because they simply do not look like anyone else's eyes on this planet. They're too expressive, too deep, too alive, and they carry this intensity, this smoldering, almost cinematic quality that makes people do double takes even when they have no idea who he is. There are actual documented cases of non-fans, people who have never listened to a single BTS song stopping in their tracks because they saw Taehyung walk by and their brain just went, wait, what was that? Go back. Look again. That's not fame doing that. That's pure biological response to a face that breaks the algorithm of normal human appearance. Now let's talk about another factor that the detective highlighted as a major evasion liability: Taehyung's fashion sense. And oh boy, this is where things get really interesting. See, most celebrities who want to go unnoticed adopt what's called gray man theory, the idea that you should dress in neutral, unremarkable colors and styles that allow you to blend into the visual background noise of any environment. Gray, black, navy, muted tones, generic cuts become wallpaper, become furniture, become invisible. Kim Taehyung does the exact opposite. This is a man who has been photographed at airports wearing vintage Celine coats, oversized Bottega Veneta leather pieces, hand-painted jackets, layered accessories that look like they were curated by a museum, and on more than one occasion, berets. Berets in South Korea in 2023 in an airport. The detective actually laughed when he talked about this because, in his words, a beret in Incheon Airport is basically a flashing neon arrow pointing at your head saying, "I am someone important, please look at me." And it's not that Taehyung is trying to attract attention, it's that his relationship with fashion is deeply personal, almost artistic. He doesn't dress to be seen, he dresses to express. He treats clothing as a canvas, as a mood, as a conversation with himself. But the unintended consequence is that every single outfit he puts together is so visually striking, so deliberately composed, so far removed from what the average person on the street is wearing, that he might as well be walking around with a spotlight strapped to his back. The detective explained that one of the cardinal rules of evasion is dress for the environment, not for yourself. If you're walking through Myeongdong on a Saturday afternoon, you wear what everyone in Myeongdong is wearing. Jeans, sneakers, a simple jacket, maybe a baseball cap. You match the visual temperature of your surroundings. V walks through Myeongdong looking like he just stepped off a Milan runway, and the temperature of the entire street changes to match him instead. Number 5. Jin. Kim Seok-jin, worldwide handsome, the eldest Taehyung of BTS, a man who has literally been stopped by strangers on the street in countries he's never promoted in, simply because the human brain cannot process the symmetry of his face without short-circuiting. But here's the thing. When the detective analyzed Jin's ability to go undetected, it wasn't the face that came up first. It wasn't the hair. It wasn't even the voice. It was the shoulders. Those legendary, mythical, internet-breaking shoulders. The detective said something that honestly made me pause and rethink everything I thought I knew about physical disguise. In my line of work, I've followed hundreds of targets. I've lost people who changed jackets, people who swapped hats, people who altered their posture mid-walk to throw me off, but I have never, not once in 15 years, encountered a target whose shoulder-to-waist ratio was so extreme that it functioned as a biometric identifier. Let that sink in. Kim Seok-jin's shoulders are so broad, so structurally prominent, so disproportionately wide compared to his waist that a trained investigator categorized them as a biometric identifier. That's the same category as fingerprints, iris patterns, the geometry of your ear. Jin's shoulders are, from a surveillance perspective, the equivalent of walking around with his name tattooed across his back in 60-point font. And the thing about shoulders is, you can't hide them. You can cover your face with a mask, you can change your hair with a hat, you can alter your height with different shoes. But shoulders? Shoulders are skeletal. They're structural. They are the literal frame upon which your entire upper body is built, and Kim Seok-jin's frame was built like a swimmer who was genetically engineered in a laboratory specifically designed to produce the broadest possible human silhouette. The detective explained that in professional tailing, one of the key techniques is called silhouette tracking. When you're following someone through a dense crowd and you lose visual contact with their face, you switch to tracking their overall body shape, the outline, the silhouette. Most people's silhouettes are generic enough that this technique becomes unreliable after a few seconds. But Jin? Jin's silhouette is a signature. That inverted triangle, wide at the top, narrow at the waist, tapering down to relatively slim hips, is so distinctive that the detective claimed he could identify Jin from behind at a distance of 50 meters in a crowd of hundreds, just from the shape of his upper body. 50 meters! From behind! That's not surveillance, that's basically cheating. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, because unlike J-Hope at number 7 and V at number 6, Jin actually has some legitimate advantages when it comes to hiding, and the detective was fair about acknowledging them. First, Jin's energy in public, when he's not performing or being filmed, is surprisingly understated. A lot of people who only know Jin from variety shows, from Run BTS, from concert stages, expect him to be this loud, joke-cracking, chaotic presence at all times. And yes, that side of him absolutely exists, and it's glorious. But the Jin who walks through the streets of Seoul on his day off? That Jin is different. He's calmer, more measured. He moves with a kind of quiet confidence that doesn't scream for attention. The detective noted that Jin has what he called natural civilian energy, the ability to modulate his public persona down to a frequency that doesn't immediately register as celebrity to the average passerby. This is actually a genuine skill, and not every idol has it. Some idols, even when they're trying to be low-key, carry an aura of performance that leaks out through their posture, their grooming, their hyper-awareness of being watched. Jin, when he's off duty, genuinely seems to shed that layer. He slouches a little. He walks at a normal pace. He looks at his phone like a regular person. He doesn't scan his environment for cameras. For a window of time, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10, he can actually pass as just a very tall, very broad, very unusually handsome man going about his business. But that window always closes. And it closes for 3 reasons. Reason 1, the shoulders, which we've already discussed, and which operate as a 24/7 tracking beacon that no amount of behavioral modulation can deactivate. Reason 2, the face, and we need to talk about this face, because the detective had a genuinely fascinating analysis of why Jin's handsomeness is specifically problematic from an evasion standpoint. See, there are different kinds of attractive faces. Some faces are attractive in a warm, approachable way. They make you feel comfortable. Some faces are attractive in an edgy, intense way. They make you feel intrigued. Number 4. Jimin. Park Jimin, 5'8" on a generous day, compact frame, delicate features. The kind of build that, on paper, should vanish in any moderately crowded street in Seoul without a trace. If you were designing the perfect candidate for urban anonymity based purely on physical specifications, height, weight, body frame, overall visual footprint, Jimin would score near the top. He's not towering like RM. He doesn't have Jin's shoulder billboard situation. He doesn't walk like a music video the way J-Hope does. By every measurable, objective physical metric, Park Jimin should be invisible. And yet, and this is where the detective's voice dropped into this almost bewildered tone, like he was describing something he still couldn't fully explain, Jimin is one of the most detectable human beings he has ever studied. Not because of what he looks like, but because of what he does to the space around him. The detective used a term that I had never heard in the context of surveillance before: ambient distortion. He described it like this. Most people exist within their own physical space. They take up the volume of their body, and that's it. Park Jimin takes up the volume of the entire room. When he walks in, something changes. The air pressure shifts. People adjust their posture without knowing why. Eyes move toward him before the brain even processes what it's looking at. I've seen this maybe 3 times in my career with non-celebrity targets, people who have an energy so dense that it warps the behavior of everyone around them. Jimin does it every single time he enters a space, and he doesn't even know he's doing it. Now, let's unpack this, because it sounds almost mystical, but the detective was quick to ground it in actual behavioral science. What he's describing is a phenomenon that psychologists have studied extensively in the context of what's called high-presence individuals, people whose combination of body language, micro-expressions, movement quality, and unconscious social signaling creates an outsized impact on their environment. And Park Jimin, whether he's on a stadium stage in front of 60,000 people or walking into a convenience store in Hanamdong at midnight, operates at the absolute ceiling of this phenomenon. Let's start with the way he moves. Jimin trained as a contemporary dancer at Busan High School of Arts, one of the most prestigious art schools in South Korea, before he ever joined Big Hit. His training wasn't just technical, it was deeply physical, deeply somatic, rooted in the idea that every movement of the human body communicates something. And that training didn't just make him an extraordinary performer, it fundamentally rewired how his body interacts with gravity. The detective pointed this out with almost clinical precision. Normal people fight gravity. They stomp, they shuffle, they drag their weight from point A to point B. Jimin negotiates with gravity. Every step he takes has a quality of intentionality, a lightness, a precision, a fluidity that is immediately, viscerally different from how regular human beings move. And here's the critical part. Jimin isn't doing this consciously. He's not thinking, let me walk gracefully right now. It's baked into his neuromuscular system. Years of dance training have given him a default movement quality that is so refined, so controlled, so aesthetically distinct that it functions as a constant, low-frequency signal broadcasting to everyone around him. This person is different. This person is trained. This person matters. You can put Jimin in the baggiest clothes on the planet. You can give him a mask, a hat, oversized glasses, a scarf wrapped up to his eyebrows. And the second he takes 3 steps, just 3, the quality of those steps will betray him. Not because they're dramatic, not because they're showy, but because they're perfect. Perfectly weighted, perfectly balanced, perfectly controlled. And perfection, in a world of imperfect shuffling, stumbling, slouching human movement, is a spotlight you can't turn off. But it's not just the movement. Let's talk about Jimin's eyes, because the detective spent a significant amount of time on this, and for good reason. Jimin has what fans and non-fans alike have described as the most expressive eyes in K-pop, and while that might sound like hyperbolic fan language, the detective confirmed it from a purely observational standpoint. Jimin's eyes communicate at a bandwidth that most human faces simply cannot achieve. When he looks at someone, really looks at them, there's an intensity there that lands like a physical sensation. It's warm, but it's heavy. It's inviting, but it's penetrating. People who have been looked at by Jimin in person describe it almost unanimously as overwhelming. Not in a threatening way, but in the way that standing too close to a bonfire is overwhelming. You feel it in your chest.
Number 3. RM. Kim Namjoon. The leader. The strategist. The man with a verified IQ of 148 who taught himself English by watching Friends, who reads Nietzsche and Foucault for fun, who delivers speeches at the United Nations with the composure of a seasoned diplomat, and who, according to the detective, possesses the single most sophisticated understanding of evasion theory among all 7 BTS members, and still can't hide. Let's get into why, because RM's case is genuinely the most frustrating one on this list. Not frustrating for us, frustrating for him. Because Kim Namjoon is smart enough to know exactly what he needs to do to disappear, and physically incapable of doing it. The detective started his analysis of RM with a compliment, which was notable because he hadn't done that with any of the previous members. He said, Namjoon is the only member who understands the science of invisibility. When I studied his patterns, his clothing choices on low-profile outings, his route selections, his timing, his behavioral adjustments in different environments, I saw something I rarely see in celebrity targets: deliberate, intelligent, systematic evasion strategy. And he's right. If you study RM's off-duty appearances, the rare paparazzi shots, the fan-taken photos from museum visits and bookstore runs, the glimpses of him walking through quieter neighborhoods in Seoul, you see a man who has clearly thought about this. His clothing choices on personal outings are masterfully understated. He gravitates toward earth tones: olive, brown, charcoal, muted gray, in loose, unstructured fits that deliberately minimize his visual impact. No logos, no statement pieces, no designer items that scream price tag. Just clean, simple, intentionally forgettable garments that 1,000 other Korean men in their late 20s might be wearing on any given day. The detective was impressed by this. He said most celebrities make the mistake of thinking a disguise is something you put on: a mask, a hat, a pair of glasses. But Namjoon understands that a disguise is something you become. It's not about adding layers of concealment. It's about subtracting layers of distinction. And Namjoon, intellectually, has this concept mastered. His route selection is another indicator of strategic thinking. RM is known to frequent art galleries, independent bookstores, and museums, places that attract a specific demographic of quiet, contemplative, often solitary visitors who are generally too absorbed in their own cultural experience to pay close attention to the people around them. This is brilliant target environment selection. A crowded shopping mall in Gangnam? Terrible choice. Too many young people, too many phone cameras, too much idle visual scanning. But a small contemporary art exhibition in a converted warehouse in Seong-Sadong on a Wednesday afternoon? Perfect. The crowd is sparse. The lighting is dim. People are looking at the walls, not at each other. And the social norm in those spaces is to be quiet, reflective, and respectful of others' personal space. Namjoon gravitates toward these environments instinctively, and the detective noted that this alone demonstrates a level of evasion intelligence that puts him significantly above the 4 members below him on this list. He also has strong behavioral control. Unlike J-Hope, who can't suppress his energy, or Jimin, whose body language shifts betray him when he senses recognition, Namjoon has the ability to maintain a consistent, neutral, unremarkable behavioral baseline for extended periods. He can walk through a space without drawing energy from it or projecting energy into it. He can stand in front of a painting for 20 minutes with his hands in his pockets and his expression completely still, looking like nothing more than a thoughtful man having a private moment with art. In those moments, the detective said, Namjoon comes closer to true invisibility than any of the 4 members we've already ranked. He genuinely disappears into the context of his environment. He becomes part of the scenery. He matches the temperature of the room so perfectly that your eye slides over him without snagging. So why is he at number 3 and not higher? One word: height. Kim Namjoon stands at 181 centimeters, roughly 5 feet 11 inches, making him one of the tallest members of BTS and significantly taller than the average Korean male, which currently sits at approximately 173 centimeters. That's an 8-centimeter difference, nearly 3.5 inches. And in a country where physical conformity within a relatively narrow height range is the statistical norm, those 8 centimeters are a screaming, flashing, inextinguishable alarm signal. The detective was almost mournful when he talked about this, because you could tell he respected Namjoon's evasion intelligence and genuinely wished it could save him. Height is the one variable you cannot control, he said. You can change clothes. You can change behavior. You can change routes, timing, companions, everything. But you cannot change the fact that your head is visible above 90% of the crowd around you. And when your head is above the crowd, your face is exposed to a wider visual field, which means more eyes have a chance to register your features, which means more potential recognition events, which means the mathematical probability of detection increases exponentially with every centimeter you have above the average. And RM doesn't just have height. He has a kind of height that compounds the problem. He's not just tall. He's tall with a long neck, a distinctive head shape, and a posture that, despite his best efforts, carries an unmistakable quality of leadership. This is something the detective found fascinating from a behavioral standpoint. Even when Namjoon is consciously trying to shrink himself, slouching slightly, keeping his chin down, rounding his shoulders, there's a residual authority in the way he carries his frame that leaks through. He described it as command posture, the unconscious physical language of someone who is accustomed to being in charge, to being listened to being the person in the room that others look to for direction. Namjoon has been the leader of BTS since he was a teenager. He has spent over a decade being the voice, the decision maker, the person who speaks first and speaks last. That kind of prolonged leadership role gets encoded into the body. It lives in the spine. It broadcasts through the shoulders. And it's incredibly difficult to suppress, even for someone as self-aware as Namjoon. The detective also pointed out a secondary factor that works against RM. His face, specifically its distinctiveness and profile. RM has what's often described as a strong face, pronounced jawline, defined nose, expressive brow ridge. In frontal view, a mask covers enough of these features to reduce recognizability. But in profile, from the side, the silhouette of RM's face is highly distinctive and essentially unmasked. The line from his forehead to his nose to his chin creates a contour that is uniquely his, and in crowded environments where people are approaching from multiple angles, that profile is exposed constantly. The detective said he could identify RM from a side view at significant distance purely from the facial profile combined with the height, and that combination, tall body, distinctive side profile, makes RM detectable from angles that most celebrities don't even think to protect. There's also Namjoon's voice, which, unlike Taehyung's deep rumble or Jin's animated brightness, sits in a very particular register, deep, measured, articulate, with a cadence that sounds like someone who chooses every word with precision even in casual conversation. RM doesn't speak quickly. He doesn't mumble. He enunciates. And that careful, deliberate speech pattern is recognizable not just for its sound, but for its rhythm. The detective noted that voice rhythm, the pace, the pauses, the emphasis patterns, is actually more identifiable than tone in many cases, because rhythm is deeply ingrained and almost impossible to alter without conscious, sustained effort. Namjoon speaks like a leader even when he's ordering a latte, and that leadership cadence is a fingerprint that no mask can muffle. But here's what makes RM's placement at number 3 meaningful rather than tragic. The detective genuinely believes that if Namjoon were 5 centimeters shorter, he would be in the top 2. Maybe even number 1. His strategic intelligence, his clothing discipline, his environmental selection, his behavioral control, all of it is elite level. Among all 7 members, RM has the most complete intellectual understanding of what it takes to be invisible. He's read the manual. He's studied the theory. He's practiced the technique. But he's trapped in a body that towers above the manual specifications, and no amount of genius can solve a problem that's written into your skeleton. The detective's closing statement on RM was tinged with what I can only describe as professional admiration mixed with professional pity. Kim Nam-joon is the chess grandmaster trapped in a body that's playing basketball. His mind knows exactly how to disappear. His body won't let him. Every strategy he deploys is correct. Every instinct he follows is sound. And none of it matters, because the moment he stands up, the crowd parts around him like water around a pillar, and every eye in the vicinity is handed a clear, unobstructed line of sight to the tallest, most distinctive face in the room. He's brilliant. He's disciplined. And he's 6 feet of unavoidable visibility. Number 2, Jungkook. Jungkook, the golden magne, the man who can sing, dance, paint, film, edit, play sports, cook, and apparently, according to a Korean private detective with 15 years of field experience, almost perfectly vanish into thin air. Almost. And that almost is doing so much heavy lifting in this sentence that it deserves its own paragraph, its own documentary, its own Netflix series. Because Jungkook's case is the most heartbreaking near miss on this entire list. He is so close to being the perfect urban ghost that the detective actually paused during his analysis, shook his head, and said something that will stay with me. Jungkook is the most naturally gifted evader I've ever analyzed among public figures. If it weren't for one thing, one single, permanent, self-inflicted thing, I genuinely believe he could walk through Myeongdong on a Saturday and nobody would know. Let's break down why the detective was this impressed, because it's not just empty compliment. Jungkook possesses a combination of physical and behavioral traits that, from a surveillance evasion standpoint, read like a cheat code. First, his physique. Jungkook stands at approximately 179 centimeters, roughly 5'10", which places him almost exactly at the sweet spot for Korean male invisibility. He's tall enough to not look short, but not so tall that his head pokes above the crowd line the way RM's does. His build, while athletic and well-defined under fitted clothing, is the kind that disappears entirely under the oversized hoodies, baggy cargo pants, and loose-fit streetwear that he gravitates toward on off-duty days. And this is where Jungkook's first genius move reveals itself. His casual wardrobe is almost militaristically optimized for anonymity. We're talking plain black hoodies. We're talking generic sneakers that could belong to any 20-something guy in Itaewon. We're talking baseball caps pulled low, face masks pulled high, with a gap between them so narrow that the only visible features are his eyes and a sliver of his nose bridge. The detective compared Jungkook's casual disguise protocol to what he called urban camouflage doctrine, the same principles used by undercover operatives who need to move through civilian environments without attracting attention. Match the visual baseline of your surroundings, or what the demographic around you wears. Eliminate all distinguishing markers. And Jungkook does this instinctively. Not because he studied it, not because someone trained him, but because Jungkook, the kid from Busan who joined Big Hit at 15 years old, who grew up inside the most observed fishbowl in modern entertainment history, developed these instincts the way an animal develops camouflage, through necessity, through repetition, through the primal understanding that survival sometimes means not being seen. But the physical camouflage is just the beginning. What truly sets Jungkook apart, what made the detective's eyebrows rise with genuine professional respect, is his behavioral adaptability. The detective called it chameleon protocol, and he described it as the rarest and most valuable evasion skill a person can possess. Here's what it means. Most people have one default mode of being in public. One baseline energy, one walking pace, one posture, one way of interacting with their environment. And that consistency is what makes them trackable. Once a trained eye identifies your pattern, they can predict your movements, anticipate your route, and maintain visual contact even in dense crowds. Jungkook doesn't have one default mode. He has several, and he switches between them fluidly, instinctively, and with a naturalness that the detective found almost unsettling. In a quiet residential neighborhood, Jungkook becomes quiet. His steps shorten. His energy compresses. He moves like a local resident walking home from work. Unhurried, unremarkable, blending into the rhythm of the street so perfectly that you'd swear he lived there. In a busy commercial district, he shifts into a different gear. Faster pace, more purposeful stride, head slightly down, navigating through foot traffic with the efficient, don't look at me energy of someone late for an appointment. At a gym, and Jungkook is famously devoted to his fitness routine, he becomes just another dedicated lifter. Headphones in, hood up, eyes focused on his own reflection in the mirror, radiating the universal, don't talk to me. I'm in the zone, energy that is the global language of serious gym goers everywhere. Each environment gets a different Jungkook, a different energy, a different rhythm, a different person. The detective said that in all his years of surveillance work, he has rarely seen a civilian, let alone a celebrity, demonstrate this level of environmental adaptation. Most celebrities have one disguise, he explained. They put it on and hope it works everywhere. Jungkook customizes his disguise for each specific context. That's not just smart. That's instinct. That's talent. And then there's Jungkook's face, which, counterintuitively, actually works in his favor in certain conditions. Yes, Jungkook is extraordinarily handsome. That's documented, verified, and not up for debate. But his handsomeness operates differently from Jin's or Taehyung's. Jin's face disrupts because of its impossible symmetry. Taehyung's face disrupts because of its artistic, almost ethereal quality. Jungkook's face, when partially concealed, has a quality that the detective described as demographically compatible. Meaning, and this is fascinating, the visible portion of Jungkook's face, when reduced to just the eyes and nose bridge stripped by a mask and cap combo, falls within a range that is common enough among young Korean men that it doesn't immediately trigger that person is someone response. His eyes, while beautiful, don't have the dramatic intensity of Jimin's or the distinctive shape of Taehyung's. His visible features, in isolation, are attractive but not disruptive. They don't break the algorithm. They pass through the filter. And in those brief, golden moments where everything aligns, the right outfit, the right environment, the right behavioral mode, the right angle, Jungkook achieves something that no other member on this list achieves: genuine, functional, real-world anonymity. He disappears. Actually disappears. Not for a few minutes. For hours. There are documented periods where Jungkook has moved through public spaces in Seoul, restaurants, convenience stores, arcades, PC bangs, without being recognized for extended stretches of time. The detective confirmed this, saying, Jungkook is the only BTS member where I would genuinely need to work to maintain a tail. He's unpredictable. He adapts. He reads his environment and adjusts in real time. Following him would require active effort and constant attention. So why isn't he number one? Why is he sitting here at number 2 instead of wearing the crown? Because of the tattoos. Those beautiful, meaningful, deeply personal tattoos that cover Jungkook's right hand, wrist, and forearm. The ones he started getting in 2019 and has gradually expanded into an intricate sleeve of interconnected designs, are, from an evasion standpoint, the single most catastrophic self-sabotage decision he could have possibly made. And the detective was almost pained when he discussed this, because you could hear the professional frustration in his voice, the frustration of watching a natural-born ghost voluntarily set himself on fire. Tattoos are the worst enemy of anonymity, the detective said, and his voice was flat, final, absolute. Faces can be covered. Bodies can be hidden under clothing. Voices can be muffled. But visible tattoos, especially distinctive, well-documented, extensively photographed tattoos on the hands, are a permanent, uncoverable identification marker that functions in every lighting condition, from every angle, at virtually any distance where the hand is visible. And Jungkook's tattoos are not small, subtle, easily concealed marks. They are bold, visible, instantly recognizable works of art that include the word Army across his knuckles, a variety of interconnected symbols and designs that fans have cataloged and analyzed down to the millimeter, and a coverage pattern that extends across the back of his hand in a configuration that is, as the detective bluntly stated, more unique than a fingerprint and 10 times more visible. Every time Jungkook reaches for a door handle, picks up a coffee cup, adjusts his cap, checks his phone, waves down a taxi, or performs any of the 1,000 small hand gestures that human beings make unconsciously throughout the day, those tattoos are exposed. Briefly, sometimes. Partially, often. But enough. Enough for a sharp eye. Enough for a fan who knows exactly what pattern to look for. Enough for a phone camera that only needs 1.5 seconds to capture an image that will be on Twitter within the hour. The detective described watching Jungkook's public movement patterns and noting that Jungkook himself is clearly aware of this vulnerability. He often keeps his right hand in his pocket. He wears long sleeves, even in warm weather. He positions his hand behind his body when walking in crowded areas. These are conscious, deliberate countermeasures, and they work, sometimes. But they also create their own problems. A young man walking through Seoul in August wearing long sleeves with one hand permanently stuffed in his pocket is, in itself, a mildly unusual sight. It's not damning. It's not a dead giveaway. But it's a micro-anomaly, a tiny deviation from expected behavior that a trained eye or an attentive fan might notice and file away as number 1 Suga. Min Yoongi, the man who made a 15-year veteran Korean private detective, someone who has tailed corporate fraudsters through the labyrinthine backstreets of Gangnam, tracked cheating spouses across 3 different cities in a single night, and maintained visual contact with professional criminals who were actively trying to lose him. Sit back in his chair, let out a long breath, and say 5 words that he admitted he had never said about any target, celebrity or otherwise, in his entire career. I would genuinely lose him. Not, he'd be difficult. Not, he'd give me a challenge. Not, I'd need extra resources. No, I would genuinely lose him. Full stop. Min Yoongi, in the professional, clinical, dispassionate assessment of a trained Korean private investigator, is functionally invisible. And what makes this number 1 ranking so devastating, so absolute, so utterly unchallengeable, is that Yoongi doesn't achieve invisibility through effort, strategy, or technique. Although he possesses all 3, he achieves it because invisibility is his default state. It's his factory setting. It's the mode his entire being reverts to the moment he steps off a stage, puts down a microphone, and walks out into the world as Min Yoongi instead of Suga, instead of August D. And that distinction, that clean, surgical separation between the performer and the person, is something the detective identified as the single most important factor in Yoongi's evasion superiority. Let's start with the physical baseline, because this is where Yoongi's advantages begin compounding in ways that are almost unfair to the other 6 members. Min Yoongi stands at approximately 174 centimeters, roughly 5'8.5", which places him almost exactly at the Korean male average. Not above it, not below it, dead center. In surveillance terminology, this is called height neutrality, and it is the single most valuable physical attribute a person can have when trying to avoid detection. RM's height makes him a tower. Jin's shoulders make him a billboard. But Yoongi's height makes him nothing. Statistically nothing. Demographically nothing. His head sits at the exact level where it blends into the crowd line, neither protruding above it nor conspicuously below it, creating a condition the detective described as visual submersion. Yoongi doesn't stand in a crowd. He submerges into it. His head becomes one of thousands at the same altitude, and the eye, trained or untrained, has no anchor point to distinguish it from any other. His build reinforces this advantage. Yoongi is slim, lean, without the broad structural frame of Jin or the athletic definition of Jungkook. Under the oversized, dark-toned layers he habitually wears, and we'll get to his clothing strategy in a moment, because it's masterful, his body essentially ceases to communicate any distinguishing physical information. No width, no bulk, no silhouette signature. He becomes a shape. A generic, unreadable, forgettable shape moving through space with the visual impact of a shadow passing across a wall. But the physical advantages, as significant as they are, represent maybe 30% of why Yoongi sits at number 1. The remaining 70% is behavioral. And this is where the detective's analysis shifted from professional assessment into something closer to genuine awe. Min Yoongi possesses what the detective called negative presence, and he was very specific that this is not an insult, but the highest possible compliment in the vocabulary of evasion. Negative presence is the ability to not just avoid attracting attention, but to actively deflect it. to create a kind of anti-energy that causes the human eye to slide away, to move through a space in a way that makes observers unconsciously categorize you as unimportant, uninteresting, not worth a second glance. Most people have neutral presence. They neither attract nor repel attention. A few people, like J-Hope or Jimin, have overwhelming positive presence. They pull every eye toward them like magnets. But negative presence? The ability to actually push attention away? That is extraordinarily rare. And Yoongi has it in a concentration that the detective said borders on supernatural. Let's talk about how this manifests in practice. When Min Yoongi walks through a public space, and the detective studied multiple instances of this through available footage and secondhand accounts, he does something that almost no other celebrity does, and that most trained surveillance operatives spend months learning to replicate. He matches the ambient energy of his environment with molecular precision. Not approximately, not closely, perfectly. If the people around him are walking at a pace of 4 kilometers per hour, Yoongi walks at 4 kilometers per hour. Not 4.2, not 3.8. 4. If the general posture of pedestrians on that street at that time of day is slightly hunched, hands in pockets, eyes on the ground, that is exactly the posture Yoongi adopts. If the emotional temperature of the crowd is flat, tired, Monday morning commuter energy, Yoongi's energy is flat, tired, Monday morning commuter energy. He doesn't just blend in. He synchronizes. He becomes indistinguishable from his surroundings the way a single drop of water becomes indistinguishable from the ocean it falls into. The detective explained that this level of environmental synchronization is the single hardest evasion skill to master, and most people who attempt it fail because they overcorrect. They try so hard to act normal that the effort itself becomes visible. Yoongi doesn't try, and that's the terrifying part. He doesn't try because he's not acting. The quiet, low energy, minimal movement, zero drama version of Min Yoongi that walks through the streets of Seoul isn't a performance. It isn't a disguise. It's him. It's who he actually is when the cameras are off and the music stops. And this is where Yoongi's personal history becomes essential context for understanding his #1 ranking. Because this isn't a skill he learned. It's an identity he's lived. Min Yoongi grew up in Daegu, in a family that wasn't wealthy, in circumstances that required him to be quiet, self-contained, and economical with his energy from a very young age. Before he was an idol, before he was a rapper, before he was Suga or August D, he was a kid who spent hours alone in his room writing lyrics on a cheap computer, observing the world from a distance rather than inserting himself into it. Introversion isn't a strategy for Yoongi. It's his architecture. It's the foundation upon which his entire personality is built. And when your natural state of being is quiet observation rather than active participation, invisibility isn't something you have to learn. It's something you have to unlearn for the stage, and then gratefully return to the moment you step off it. Now, let's talk about his clothing, because this is where Yoongi's instinctive understanding of anonymity reaches its peak expression. The detective described Yoongi's off-duty wardrobe as the most surveillance-resistant clothing strategy he has ever encountered in a public figure. And when he broke down why, it was genuinely illuminating. Yoongi's off-duty palette is almost exclusively dark, black, dark gray, deep navy, occasionally muted olive. No bright colors. No patterns. No logos. No textures that catch light or create visual interest. His fits are consistently oversized, large enough to obscure his body shape entirely, eliminating any possibility of build-based identification. His accessories are minimal and functional. A plain black cap, a basic face mask, sometimes a simple pair of earbuds. No jewelry. No watches. No rings that catch light and draw the eye. Every element of his outfit is selected, whether consciously or instinctively, to reduce his visual information output to absolute zero. The detective compared it to noise-canceling technology. Most people's clothing adds visual noise to their environment. Yoongi's clothing cancels it. He absorbs light. He absorbs attention. He absorbs distinctiveness. By the time your eye reaches him, there's nothing left to register. And then there's the face. Yoongi's face, the detective noted, has a quality that is paradoxically both handsome and forgettable, and he meant that as the ultimate compliment. In repose, in its resting, default, unexpressive state, Yoongi's face settles into a composition that is pleasant but not arresting, attractive but not disruptive. It doesn't trigger the cognitive dissonance that Jin's symmetry creates. It doesn't produce the magnetic pull of Jimin's expressiveness. It doesn't command attention the way Taehyung's bone structure does. When Yoongi's face is at rest, it is, for lack of a better word, peaceful, calm, still. And in that stillness, it becomes remarkably difficult to identify, because the features that make Suga recognizable on stage, the sharp gaze, the intensity, the fierce concentration, the smirk that communicates 1,000 things at once, are all activated expressions. They're performance states. And when those performance states are deactivated, what remains is a face that could belong to any quiet, introspective Korean man in his early 30s sitting alone in a cafe, staring out the window, thinking thoughts that no one else will ever hear. The detective also highlighted Yoongi's hands, and this is a direct contrast to Jungkook at number 2. Yoongi's hands are clean. No tattoos. No distinctive rings. No visual markers of any kind. When his hands emerge from his pockets, which is rare, because Yoongi instinctively keeps his hands hidden, they communicate nothing. They are anonymous hands attached to an anonymous...
And there you have it. 7 members, 7 ranks, 1 brutal, honest, fascinating verdict from a Korean private detective who has spent his career studying the science of seeing and being seen. From J-Hope at number 7, the human spotlight whose body physically refuses to stop performing, all the way down to Suga at number 1, the living shadow who turned invisibility into an art form that even a professional investigator couldn't crack. What this list really reveals isn't just who can wear a mask the best or pick the right hoodie. It reveals something deeper about each of these 7 men. About who they are when nobody's watching, about the relationship between their public selves and their private selves, about the price of fame and the shapes that identity takes when it's been observed by millions for over a decade. J-Hope can't hide because his joy is too big. V can't hide because his beauty is too rare. Jin can't hide because his presence is too structural. Jimin can't hide because his gravity is too strong. RM can't hide because his body outgrew his strategy. Jungkook almost did it. Almost, but chose to wear his heart on his skin. And Yoongi? Yoongi simply walked into the crowd and never looked back. So next time you're walking through Seoul, through Myeongdong, through Hongdae, through a quiet gallery in Seongsu-dong, look around. Look carefully, because one of these 7 men might be standing right next to you. And if it's Yoongi, you'll never know. You'll never, ever know. And honestly, that might be exactly the way he likes it.